Hello, my name's Dr. Samantha Stern, and I'm a highly specialist neuropsychologist at UCLH in the Cognitive Disorders Clinic. I'm really honored to be speaking with you today about psychological support for people living at risk of FTD. So I know I don't have to go into detail with this at this audience, but from what I've heard from clients over the years and the very limited we know from the research that has been conducted, some of which has been conducted by our very own Professor Rohr here today, living at risk with FTD can pose several different challenges for people. And some of these that come up over and over again are things like the unpredictability and uncertainty of the situation, genetic factors, and that might influence the individual as well as your family, the unknowability of treatment and the future of treatment, and the fact that FTD symptoms can present very differently across individuals. Obviously, there are a number of other challenges that come up. These are things that do seem to come up quite often for individuals, and I wanted to highlight these really because it's quite normal to actually be thinking about these things and struggling when you're at risk of FTD with these certain concepts. And some of this struggle actually comes from a really positive place. Humans are very adaptive, and our brains function very much as problem-solving machines. And this is, of course, necessary because this is how we identify patterns, how we understand what's happening around us, and how we can solve problems when we're faced with challenges. The difficulty of this is that being a problem-solving machine, i.e. being human, we often have trouble when we're trying to solve a problem that really isn't a problem for us to solve in the way that other problems are in our life. So when we are faced with a highly uncertain situation and trying to cope with it, such as being at risk of FTD, it can create a lot of distress and challenges and just difficulty applying the strategies that may have worked for us in many other avenues of our life. Some common challenges that are experienced by people living at risk of FTD are things like being unsure of when to seek support. So, for instance, often we focus in the medical profession on people who have a definite diagnosis of a condition rather than individuals who are merely at risk. And I say that, as really it's an issue because we know that it can be particularly and uniquely challenging being at risk for something. And sometimes that's harder actually for us to wrap our heads around and know what to really do about that. But we tend to not focus on those people. So sometimes that creates in individuals who are in that situation where they're at risk of a condition, but they're not experiencing it, this uncertainty of should I get help? Am I even somebody to help? Or what could I seek that might be helpful? And this is compounded by just the uncertainty of what would happen in the future and that not knowing. So sometimes it also prevents us from seeking help earlier because we think maybe this isn't something that we really need or other people might need it more. This can sometimes go along with things like feelings of isolation. It can be really hard for people to understand experiences in being in this position. I don't know if anybody's experienced that here in this audience, but sometimes it's really difficult to talk about this as well with family members or friends. The genetic component of this makes this even more challenging, I think, speaking with family from what I've heard from clients. And that can be very isolating because often our family is our main source of support. And so when we're not able to talk to our family about what we're experiencing, it makes it even more difficult for us to cope in the ways that we've coped with other challenges in our lives. We also sometimes see people experiencing very significant feelings of guilt. People have talked to me about feeling almost a survivor guilt in this situation and feeling like they shouldn't be talking about it or feeling sad about being at risk because their family member actually has the illness. And that can make them feel very conflicted about how to feel and how to discuss their feelings. And they might worry about other people in the family as well and try to kind of focus more on other people and the difficulty they're experiencing rather than their own experience. And going along with all of this often are really significant feelings of grief. We often talk about grieving in terms of when we lose a loved one, but this can also sometimes come in the form of a loss of things that we hope to have or a future that we imagine for ourselves. And living at risk of something can really bring this to light where we feel we don't know what the future might hold, and that feels so much more real, and that grief can be really, really painful. And I see that a lot with people, and it can be hard to contact that grief because it looks different than how we talk about grief in our society. Everybody copes in very different ways, and this is the truth if you're coping with being at risk of FTD or if you're coping with any other type of situation in your life. We all initiate coping strategies to help ourselves adapt. And our coping can be helpful or it can be unhelpful. And oftentimes the ways we cope have unintended consequences, sometimes positive and sometimes negative. It's very true for people often that we start coping one way that might be helpful, but the more we use that strategy in the long run, sometimes those consequences become unhelpful or not what we want. So just some experiences that are very common for people who are engaging in coping strategies that might become unhelpful, things like avoidance. So trying to not think about the situation or being at risk of FTD, trying to distract yourselves with other things, trying to just act as if you know what's going to happen, even if that's a negative result. So things like acting like, oh, I know I'm going to develop this illness, so I'm just going to act like I have a positive genetic test result. Worrying about the future and thinking about all of those what ifs and what could happen. Worrying and focusing on, am I starting to develop symptoms, and focusing on different things in our experience that might be cues that we're developing symptoms, whether or not we are. And then withdrawing, that's another thing that can become really, really difficult, isolating ourselves, withdrawing from our friends and things we do that really bring our lives meaning. So going along with all of these challenges, we do have ways of helping. And I think psychological support, and I'm biased being a psychologist, but this is a primary way that we can really help people cope with these experiences. I don't know if any of you have had experiences of psychological support in the past, and maybe this isn't a kind of thing that you've even considered getting psychological support for, but actually, I think it's something that psychological support can be really uniquely equipped to help with. In a psychotherapy space, we can create a very kind of objective space to explore thoughts and feelings where people don't have to feel concerned about how what they're talking about might impact other people in their lives. And I think in this type of situation, it can be particularly helpful because there's a lot of sensitivities around talking to family or friends about these kinds of things. We can teach different kinds of coping strategies as well. So we use evidence-based interventions, and I've listed a few here that are the most common ones that we use in our service. Things like acceptance and commitment therapy, or what we call ACT for short, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, systemic or family therapy. These all have different kinds of coping strategies that are really intended to help people learn ways of dealing with very difficult thoughts and feelings that accompany challenging situations. And they just give people more tools to cope and try different things when they're having a really hard time. That being said, whether you're having a hard time or not, these strategies are helpful for everybody. I really think everybody should be doing these things, and that's me included. These are helpful strategies no matter what we go through in our lives. This is just one way, I think, one situation where they can be particularly helpful. And it's really good to know that there's lots of different techniques. And so using a one-size-fits-all model is really not helpful. I think the key is to try lots of different things. And in psychological support, working with a professional, it allows the opportunity to try some different techniques that might fit you, fit your situation, and give you different tools that appeal to you in different situations. The key here is that different things appeal to different people. And so we have to really think about a good fit between what you're going through and what you're doing to help yourself, and how it fits into your life. So I thought, instead of just listing lots and lots of techniques, because there are hundreds of them, I thought actually it might be helpful to do a couple example exercises. So you are more than welcome and in fact encouraged to follow along with me, but I'm going to go through a couple different techniques and exercises that I use with clients who are coping with being at risk of FTD or another kind of rare form of dementia that I think can be really, really helpful. Again, these are helpful things for anybody, helpful things for caregivers, family members, anyone. So I hope you hear this and think about it, maybe try it and share it as well. So for this one, you can see that I have a picture of hands on here. So first, before we get started, I want you to imagine that out in front of you, as far out as you can go, so maybe the wall in front of you, is everything that really matters to you deep in your heart, everything that's meaningful. So all the people, the places, the things you like to do, your favorite foods and drinks and music, books, movies, everything is out there on that wall. That's kind of representing that. But that's not all that's there. There's also all the problems and challenges that you have to deal with in your life today. So this could be things like living at risk of FTD or having a family member who's living at risk of FTD. It could be the worries or the different thoughts and feelings related to that. It can also just be all the things you have to do to make your life work on a regular basis. So doing the shopping, doing the cooking, managing the kids and work and your partner and all the different things you have to handle on a day-to-day basis just to make life functional and work. So now I want you to imagine, so we have all these things surrounding us out there in space, and imagine that our hands here are our thoughts and our feelings, okay? And we'll put them together kind of like this, so almost like we're opening a book. So I want us to think about, if these are our hands and they're our thoughts and feelings, what would happen if our thoughts and feelings about these things were here? If they were really close to our face, if they were out in front of us? This is trying to emulate and represent what it would be like if we were very hooked. And by hooked, I mean very focused, very fixated on these really difficult thoughts and feelings that we have throughout the day. And this can be about anything. But here, for example, maybe the thoughts and feelings we have about the uncertainty of the future. So if they were out in front of us, what might happen? Well, all those things out there that we care about are still out there, but with these thoughts and feelings so close, we can't engage with them in the same way. I would have to move in order to be able to see behind them. I can't get around them. It's inhibiting really my ability to interact. And that's really, really difficult because that makes it impossible for me to actually get beyond these and to really interact with the things that give my life meaning. So by even moving these down a little bit, and by this I mean by getting a little bit of space from our thoughts and feelings, not getting rid of them, but getting a little bit of distance and a little bit of space so they're not at the forefront of our mind and in everything we're doing. We're not so focused on them. We can start to interact a little bit better. So for example, when they're here, I can't see any of you. You can't see my eyes, you can't see my face. But even if it's just here, I can start to see you, I can start to interact, I can start to engage in those things that are really meaningful. Now imagine if I was able to put them in my lap. Again, I'm not about, and I hope you're not about to get rid of your hands. We need those still. They're very important. So they're still attached to me. They're still here. Our thoughts and feelings that are really difficult have not gone anywhere, but they're not at the forefront of everything that we're doing. They're here, and I can always bring them up here. I can always think about them and revisit them. I can take time to worry or to focus on them if I feel concerned that I'm not paying enough attention to them. But I also can put them down and engage in things that are important to me, which might actually help me feel more meaningful and comfortable in my life in general. And so this is a metaphor, obviously. Our hands are not our thoughts and feelings. But the idea is the more focused and the more fixated we become on these things, the more that they do get in the way of us being able to live our lives. And we don't want to live our lives like this. We want to live our lives like this, or with our hands ideally in our lap, where we're able to have our thoughts and feelings, we're able to recognize them, but we're able still to engage with other things that are really important to us. And so this is something to think about. And, try this. You can try this now, try this at home. Try identifying and thinking about what are those thoughts and feelings for you that sometimes feel like they're like this. What are those things? And has that been helpful? Is having those things up here helpful? And are there ways to start to maybe notice the thoughts and feelings that you have, but to bring them down so they're not right in front of our face at all times? So that's one example exercise of a skill in trying to notice these things. And there's different skills that we can teach that help people bring those hands down or bring those thoughts and feelings kind of down to a level where they're not interfering all the time. It's not about stopping our experience of having those thoughts and feelings, because we can't really do that, but it's about changing our relationship to them and what they kind of what role they play in our lives and how we use those things to move us forward. So I'm going to briefly go through another example exercise or skill that I think is really helpful. And this skill is called grounding. And so you might have done something like this. You can see here on the screen, I have the 5 senses. And the idea here, again, is to help us get a little bit of distance from our thoughts and feelings, not changing them, not getting rid of them, but by focusing in on other aspects of our experience. So you might have heard this as the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique. And the idea is that you go through each of these senses. So what are 5 things you can see? What are 4 things you can touch? What are 3 things you can hear? 2 things you can smell? 1 thing you can taste. Now, this obviously can be done very quickly and simply. You don't have to come up with any particular thing. It's all about noticing what's around you. So for sight, what are things you can see? Well, noticing maybe the colors of the room, or noticing the color of your shoe, or the shape of the chair in front of you, things like that. It's almost like that I Spy game, if you ever played that as a child. And the idea is just to tune into different aspects of our sensory experience, because you might not have noticed in detail all of those things for, right now, for example, even though you've been sitting in this room for some time. Similarly, getting in touch with what we can feel, the sensation of the chair beneath your seat or the ground under your feet, things you can hear, like maybe the ambient noise, the air conditioner, or coughs of people in the room, or the shuffle of paper, things like that. Smell, maybe there's food around, or you could maybe smell perfume, or smell different things that are coming up in the room. Taste, even just the taste of our mouths, or of a candy bar or a mint that we've had, things like that. The idea is to tap into these different sensory experiences that we often tune out, to show that we can really hone our attention into lots of different things. Often our thoughts and feelings, and unfortunately often our difficult thoughts and feelings, are the things that really grab our attention. But we can shift that attention to other things as well. Again, just to get a little bit of space, so that the hands aren't up here, they're down here. And by focusing in on other things, almost as a sensation of bringing those hands down, because we're starting to engage with things around us. So that's another strategy. And going along with this, breathing and relaxing and trying to really focus in on that experience. This is all part of maybe that term you've heard, mindfulness, of being in the present moment. But this grounding exercise is a very kind of simple and concrete way of doing that. And you don't have to do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You can do 3, 2, 1. You can do only things you see. You can really adapt it to fit what you like and what's easiest for your surroundings. So it's a strategy that I really like. Okay, so that was a real, very, very quick go around a lot of different things, but some key take-home messages just to leave you with today. There are such unique and varied challenges, as you all know, of living at risk of FTD, or having a loved one who's living at risk of FTD. And there are lots of help available. So there's lots of different talking and psychological therapies, approaches, and techniques that can be very helpful for people, no matter what they're going through, but particularly even with this situation. A one-size-fits model is not helpful, though, and I think this is why professional psychological support can be really beneficial for a lot of people. We're always happy to talk to you about what might work for you, and thinking about yourself and how you function. That's a really easy way to start to tailor these things to fit your life. And to access support, you can always talk to the RDS Direct Support team. They can help you get in touch with us in our clinic. We're happy to see people or family members who are in the situation. The NHS also has talking therapies available through IAPT. There's lots of charities and other support organizations. And of course, private support is always available. So I think the take-home message is, it's okay to think about psychological support. And in fact, this is something I think that we can be really, really helpful with, and is really normal, and often a very collaborative experience. And so I hope you think about it if it's something you're going through. And I'm happy to talk to anybody. I'm so sorry I can't make it today. But if you have any questions, you're welcome to email me to get in touch. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have or hear any reflections. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope you have a great rest of your day.